So here in the studio we have tonight Yaki Dayan, former Israeli Consul General to Los Angeles.
Good evening,
Thanks for coming. And Dan Perry, former, among others, Europe and Middle East editor with AP. Dan, we've said this is supposedly a war that nobody wants, but still can happen.
Yeah, first of all, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel for well over 8 months, and they seem to be calibrating these attacks so as to not cause so much damage that Israel is compelled to reply. But they're going to miscalculate. So on one level, eventually some event will happen that will force Israel's hand politically. The other thing is Israel can't tolerate this situation forever. If there's linkage between the situation in the north and the Gaza war, and the Gaza war doesn't end, that means that under this absurd paradigm, Hezbollah keeps firing shells and rockets and then drones at Israel for the next, 7 months? It's inadmissible. Nonetheless, Israel's strategic equation is very bad because neither do they want to risk the damage that a full-scale war against Hezbollah would probably bring to Israel's cities. And Israel also is not eager to make good on its threat to attack Beirut and Lebanese infrastructure for a lot of reasons, including that it's unfair because they don't really control Hezbollah. And at this particular moment in Israel's grappling with international near pariah status, the last thing Israel needs is to create destruction in Beirut. So they want this to go away. And realistically, Hezbollah is getting what it wants, because it's going to look like they helped compel Israel to end the war in Gaza.
Yeah, some of us remember the phone call from Ronald Reagan to Menachem Begin when he saw on TV Israeli warplanes bombing Beirut. This is 82.
But that's an important point, because I would add one more point to what Dan mentioned, and this is exactly the Americans. I mean, Israel depends heavily on the diplomatic umbrella and the ammunition coming from the United States. And the United States clearly doesn't have any interest of having a full-scale war now between Israel and Lebanon.
Why is Netanyahu doing this? There are many speculations. Dan, you have a guess?
I think he's trying to help Trump by rubbishing Biden. I mean, it would seem incredible to some people, but we all know he would rather have Trump win the election, and it seems purely political. I have to underscore, you have to go back in history a long time to find something so reckless as currently picking a fight with the U.S. when Israel's being tarred and feathered all over the world. Countries are recognizing the fictitious state of Palestine. Italy's trying to slap arms embargoes. Britain even is bristling. The U.S. is critical for Israel for munitions that enable the continuation of the war, for the veto at the Security Council, without which there would be economic sanctions at this point, quite possibly. And also, by the way, notice that the ICC hasn't yet even approved the request for the arrest warrant. That may have something to do with the Americans making threats against the ICC. All this is on the table, critical for Israel, and Netanyahu is messing with it for reasons that appear to be political, whether it's to meddle in U.S. politics or because he finds some value in throwing red meat to his base here, and you get pretty far with the right-wing base in Israel by rubbishing Biden. Whatever it is, it really had better stop.
Even the base argument was not that strong among Israeli analysts who are really baffled of this.
Listen, Jacob, I would say that airing this video was quoting the Prime Minister inconceivable. I mean, that was a huge mistake.
In about a month from today, Netanyahu is going to appear before Congress, and you think he's like, what, going to go full into American politics?
It certainly does look that way. And look, in statements Netanyahu makes off the record, and at this point it's become a bit of a joke in Israel how his off-the-record statements are at this point attributed to him. I mean, it's incredible. And what will be really interesting is whether Biden, with Netanyahu a few hundred yards away, will or won't invite him to the White House. And if he doesn't, at that point, it really is a signal that there's a major rift between Israel and its at this point, only dependable ally. And I must say, it is almost heartwarming to see how Biden distinguishes between Israel and its government, because the disdain for its government right now is, I have to think, very extreme. Again, historically, it's rare for a foreign policy crisis to clearly endanger the re-election prospects of an American president. You have to go back to 1980 with Jimmy Carter, but then it was a crisis created by the enemy Iran. Now it's a crisis amplified by the government of its ally Israel.
I agree with you. I mean, the support is really phenomenal. The support that the Democratic administration is giving
background
Israel.
here is an even bigger thing. A few weeks after Biden became the first president to visit Israel during active wartime, they began to try to engineer a major reset in the Middle East that is in Israel's interest in a very extreme way. And Netanyahu basically has projected indifference to this, as far as anyone can tell, because it's unpopular with the extreme right on which his government depends.
I differ you, Dan. I think that the whole Saudi plan is based on recognizing a Palestinian state. And it's impossible, whether you are Netanyahu or Gantz or Eisenkot, or even much more towards the left, Lapid or others, to recognize after October 7th a Palestinian state.
There are plenty of people involved in the talks who will tell you that that could have been lip service on a Palestinian state. And the main issue that has been an impediment to progress towards, I repeat, normalization with Saudi Arabia, which is an Israeli dream of many, many decades, and an alliance of the Sunni world and Israel against Iran with Western and NATO backing. What's standing in the way is even an ability to discuss the day after Hamas and Gaza.
I would say the day after is very important.
Well,
I would make,
and even that, it's been 8.5 months.
Your point about a senior Israeli political source is being quoted right now as saying the countdown for an Israeli reaction to Hezbollah has started.
Again, saber rattling. How is that helpful? And if you're going to do it, do you want to advertise you're going to do it?
if you want to shoot, don't
Really,
talk.
Exactly.
All right.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. The question is, which is Israel, the good, the bad, or the ugly? I mean, it
I
used to be
appreciate the
the good.
greatest. The way Israel lost the public opinion on social networks and elsewhere is pretty remarkable.
Israel is fighting at a great disadvantage for a number of reasons. One was mentioned here, which is that it's a democracy, and democracies are on the back foot when it comes to cyber skullduggery. But beyond that, there's 1 billion Muslims. And Israel's coalition, such as it is not nearly as large. And I would add, the youth in America, at this point, Israel's in danger of using them. And when you talk about social media and the TikTok universe and all that, it's heavily youth-oriented. Now, Israel has almost like happily abandoned that fight. And it's also been unlucky because this has corresponded with a cultural war between the progressives and even the liberals, not the conservatives, and the liberals in the U.S. And these narratives of oppressed oppressor and white people versus colored people, and if you're the former, you're always in the wrong, all that Israel has just like blundered into in this war. They should have been extremely proactive in developing a product you can sell. And instead, they've been indifferent. There's been no public diplomacy. The various PR efforts that have happened since October 7th have been largely private initiatives. I mean, you watch this in amazement. The government has done almost nothing. They had a couple of great spokesmen. One of them famously they fired because the prime minister's wife didn't like him. I mean, it's been a Keystone Cops-ish disaster. Instead of what should have been a series of brilliant strategies to overcome the built-in disadvantage.
On top of demonstrations and all of that, it looks like the coalition government is almost imploding as a result of religious legislation.
We watch these political shenanigans with utter stupefaction. But you know what? It's hard to blame the government here because the fact is they promised the religious parties all these amazing
Things have changed after
booty.
October 7th,
Well, the religious, yes. What's changed is that if there was an election today, Netanyahu would lose, and so he's desperate to forestall an election, even though. In a parliamentary system, after a failure as cataclysmic as October 7th, you're expected to resign. The narrative is that he's told the public is that, well, but first let's do the war, and now he stands accused of prolonging the war artificially. All this ends if the religious parties bolt, and so they have extortionary power. And it's not that Netanyahu found the time to deal with the law appointing scores of rabbis for secular municipalities, it's money thrown down a drain. It's that this is being imposed on him. And the question is whether at some point the non-religious elements of his coalition, the few remaining saints in Likud, will have had enough, calculating that if they continue down this path, they will become so unpopular that they will be unelectable even post-Netanyahu. It's conceivable that this will lead to rebellion because on the surface, the way the coalition is conducting itself is so brazen that, again, to repeat a previous thing I said, you have to go way back in history to find an example of a democratic government that is so flying in the face of public opinion.
Yeah, well, to your point, Dan, Yaki, it all stems from the fact that Netanyahu does not take responsibility, doesn't want any inquiry, not going to quit anytime soon, not even thinking about it. That creates a lot of tension.
I agree. I think that all of the people that were responsible for this catastrophic thing on October 7th have to resign, whether it's the Prime Minister or the Chief of Staff in the Army and others. All of them have to go. And I think that the problem in this parliamentary system in Israel is that you have to have elections in order to make it happen, because the Prime Minister doesn't take responsibility.
There's another way to replace the government other than elections, which is a constructive no confidence vote in the Knesset, which means the existing Knesset can appoint a different prime minister. And the Likud actually has the option of replacing Netanyahu and appointing a different prime minister from
small
Likud.
slim chances for that.
Well, this is very theoretical.
Of course it's theoretical.
Yeah, it is.
But you know, theory sometimes becomes practice. That's the nature of the interplay between the two. It is possible for Likud to replace Netanyahu and ask the opposition to join a unity government, and they probably would be met with a yes. America's weak-kneed response to the outrages of the Houthis is genuinely dangerous, and it projects weakness, it projects incompetence, it projects perhaps indifference, and basically it gives courage and succor to bad faith players everywhere, well beyond Iran. It will encourage Russian skullduggeries in Eastern Europe, and I can literally say the fact that the U.S. is allowing the Houthis to impede maritime trade through the Suez Canal increases the chances that China attacks Taiwan.
Exactly.